Hello everyone, welcome to the January Outdoor Ethics Roundtable. Tonight we'll be discussing the short-term camp administrator NCAP requirements and how those relate to outdoor ethics. This presentation was presented by Eric Heiser. However, unfortunately, the first few slides of this presentation were not recorded on the Zoom session. So this is Matt, and I'll be going through the first few slides, and then we'll hook it up with the rest of Eric's presentation that was recorded. So I'll do my best to present through the slides that Eric did. However, I probably won't do as wonderful as a job as he did. So in this discussion, we'll discuss why short-term camp, what it is, what those training requirements are, how the NCAP standards relate to that, and an overview of those, and then some common outdoor ethics scenarios. And then afterwards, you'll see the question and answer section on the recorded video. And so once I get to the point where Eric's slides have been recorded, we'll transition over to Eric's actual presentation. So previously, there weren't really any BSA standards other than the Guide to Safe Scouting that applied to district and council events not considered a resident or a family camp. And so this has been implemented to ensure the quality and the safety of all district and council organized overnight activities. It's important to note the distinction here of district and council organized overnight activities as opposed to unit organized activities, which will be discussed a little bit later. There were previously only some weekend events that were required to follow NCAP quality and safety standards. Not everything was. And that's changing here for all district and council organized activities so that we can meet NCAP standards, ensure the quality and safety of those. The reason for the change is that previously there were a great deal of liability and accident sickness claims that have come from these type of events, district and council events. So there's a few things here in the bullet points that were claimed on activities of this nature, like a district camporee or a council training or something like this. And there was no way to ensure that these things didn't happen beforehand. And so having a short-term camp administrator adding that into the mix and having these be approved through NCAP is a way to make sure that we can kind of eliminate some of these issues that we've had in the past. So this is an important definition, and this will clear up hopefully a lot of confusion for people. A short-term camp is any council-organized overnight camping program, whether one-time or continuing, that is 1, 2, or 3 nights in length, where the council or its agents provide the staffing and program and may provide food services, and includes camps conducted off council property. That's an important one. National training courses are subject to the short-term camp requirements regardless of format or duration. So the thing that it doesn't say here is unit organized and unit administered camps. So the difference between a short-term camp and a long-term camp is for any council-organized overnight program that is 4 or more nights, so like summer camp. Okay, a short-term camp is anything that is 3 nights or less that is also council or district organized. Okay, so here's kind of a little flow chart. If your camp is overnight, let's go over here. If it's 4 or more nights, if it's 4 or more nights, it's not included as a short-term camp. That would be considered a long-term camp. Okay, now there's a distinction here between unit-operated camps and council or district-operated camps and trainings. So if your camp is 4 or more nights and it's a council-operated program and it has council staff and food services, that's considered a long-term camp. And NCAP standards would apply to that. If it's 4 or more nights and it's just your unit camping, let's say you're going for your summer camp, long-term camp, and it's a unit-operated one, you would follow the program materials in the Guide to Safe Scouting. It's not an NCAP administered thing. Now, if it's 1 to 3 nights, this is where the short-term camps are. So if it is a council-operated program, and it has council staff or food or anything like that, that is considered a short-term camp, and that is where a short-term camp administrator would be needed to make sure that it meets the NCAP standards. Now, if this is your unit camporee, or one of your monthly unit camps, it's an overnight or a weekend, and it's unit operated, it's the same as it's always been. Follow the program materials and the guide to safe scouting. You don't need a short-term camp administrator to do anything. That's a unit operated event. So this would apply to like district camporees, trainer and master educator courses, other trainings that last 1 to 3 nights, Order of the Arrow events, things like that, because those are council and district sponsored. Okay, so here's where we clarify that. Anything that's organized by the council or the district and is an overnight event that's 3 nights or less, that is one that will need to have a short-term camp administrator sign off on it, and will need to meet the short-term camp NCAP requirements. And so as it mentions here, like I said before, district camporees, council camporees, Cub and Weebles Family Camp, Order of the Arrow events, training events like NYLT, Wood Badge. And then a little bit later in Eric's part of the presentation, or the part that we have of Eric's presentation, he will discuss how the Leave No Trace Master Educator and Trainer courses that include an overnight portion fit into this. All right, so this is the right out of the NCAP book. Oh, I don't know why it's cutting that off. Oops, let's go back. Well, that cut that off. Anyways, so this is the actual standard where it talks about the difference between long-term and short-term camp. Okay, so it gives some examples right here. So like a 5-night camp followed by a 2-night camp using the same staff would qualify as a 7-night camp program, and both of the camps have to meet the long-term camp standards. A 3-night camp followed by a day off followed by another 3-night camp using the same staff would be considered a 6-day camp, and the camps have to meet a long-term camp standard. Okay. A council offers a camp master program where the varying staff offers generally consistent program each weekend. Because these programs are more than 5 days apart, they are separate camps. Okay, so that would fall under the short-term camp definition. And then the last example would be like a Cub Scout camp is offered for 4-night sessions using the same program and staff. That would be a long-term camp. Okay, so the actual short-term camp administrator, that's the person that is responsible for ensuring that the planned camp complies with the NCAP short-term camp standards. So basically their job, it boils down to, before the camp, walking the property to ensure that it's appropriate for the event, and that means both like a BSA property or a non-council property. They have to make sure that the paperwork is filled out correctly, and any BSA approvals or any approvals that are needed are completed and obtained through the council. They confirm that the facilities and the program are safe and in good order before starting the operation, and that all of the health and safety and sanitation provisions are made. They also make sure that all activities apply with the BSA camp standards. This would mean, before the camp happens, they would have to make sure that all these boxes are checked, make sure that all the ducks are in a row, everything looks good and safe, and sign off on it on behalf of the council. This person has to be trained as an NCAP short-term camp administrator. That training is being provided. There are several that are being offered by national. And councils are also encouraged to have this training as well. So the person that fills this role, they have to be a registered scouter, and they have to have a short-term camp administrator certification issued by the BSA. Or they can also, if there's a resident camp director that has the certification from National Camping School, they're also allowed to fill this role. So here's some more information about training. If you want to scan this QR code, it will take you to a website where you can register for some trainings. There are several being offered this spring. and then councils are also encouraged to host this training so that we can get as many people as possible to fill this role. Okay. Every council will have to have an approved authorization to operate on file so that they can operate short-term camps. Councils who don't have a current NCAP authorization will have to work with NCAP and the National Committee to be able to authorize short-term camps. So it's something that has to be done. Every council is going to need at least one person in this role so that you can host short-term camps. So here is the process for a short-term camp NCAP. There's a pre-camp process, so there's certain things that need to be done before the camp happens. There's going to be a camp walkthrough where there's an on-site declaration, an on-site documentation that happens, and then there's some stuff that happens post-camp and some review that occurs after that. So the pre-camp, this is where the site is reviewed. If it's not on a BSA accredited camp property, we have to use the NCAP site appraisal form, and then we submit that to the council to get approval. So if you're going to camp on someone's private land or in a state park or like National Forest or BLM or anything like that, public lands, you would have to get this form filled out. So the next step to that is the camp administrator has to file the NCAP local council authorization and declaration form with the council. The scout executive signs that, as well as the NCAP chair or their designee. And then once that's all approved, the camp can then be planned in accordance with NCAP standards, including the required plans. So we can't just show up at a site anymore and say, hey, we're going to have our camp at, this state park or whatnot, and plan it and show up and do it. We have to make sure that the site is approved before that takes place. You can't really start any planning that is specific to that site before this approval process takes place. All right, and here is where we're going to link up with Eric's presentation so that he can finish his wonderful presentation that he prepared. So thank you for your patience on this, and thank you for participating in this roundtable and reviewing this video.
Is in order. You've got the safety equipment you said you had. You're doing the appropriate medical checks, making sure that if we do have folks with medical conditions, that's communicated to whoever is going to be your course health officer. If you're doing a trainer course, or your course health officer, if you're doing a master educator course, and then they'll sign the assessment part of that of the local council authorization and declaration form to indicate that they've checked everything is shipshape and the program is ready to launch. That's about it for your part in the NCAP program. There are some other things that you may be keeping. For example, a first aid logbook, or if you have an incident, those reports would need to be completed, turned into your short-term camp administrator and added to the documentation. Probably 90% of our courses never have an incident where we generate any of that, in which case there's nothing more that you do except provide the short-term camp administrator the number of participants who actually went through your program so that they can record that in the council records. The council will then use the assessment form to make sure that we monitor for any incidents that are occurring. So for example, if we see at one of our properties an unusual incidence of a certain type of injury, or if there's an illness that we see, hantavirus or something like that, the council will use this information to try to improve its program, improve its facilities, and eliminate whatever may be causing those injuries or that illness. So that's a part of the back end of scouting that we as volunteers don't see all that much, but is very important to the overall health and safety of our youth and participants going forward. The last step then is the NCAP process goes through that to make sure that councils understand all the requirements and that they're following the appropriate procedures to make sure that all these things are delivered seamlessly so that our program participants see and have a great, wonderful time, and they don't have to worry about all the sweating in the background that's going on to make sure that they have that mountaintop experience we want every scout to have whenever they come to a scout property or a scout course. With that, we're through the tough part, and now we're going to sort of segue into, well, what are some of the national camp standards that apply? And we'll go through the different series and talk a little bit about what they are and how they apply to what you're doing, and which ones of these standards are you as a course director or trainer going to really sort of be focused on as you're putting your program together. So the very first section of the standards, after you get through the narrative at the beginning of the manual, is what are called the SA division, or standards applicability. These define the types of camps. So this is where you go to get the answers to the questions, am I a short-term camp? Am I a long-term camp? It explains how councils authorize their short-term camps, how the assessment process is handled, and clarifies a bunch of the governmental stuff that councils have to do for governance. By and large, once you know you're a short-term camp, you're not going to be dealing with the SA standards. It's really more for councils to define which box their various programs fit into. Where we become involved as volunteers is in the program design standard. One of the things that we always are trying to do is to make sure that when we design programs, they're fun and they're engaging and that they're aimed at the right age level for the participants. There are differences between presenting a Leave No Trace message to Cub Scouts versus Scouts BSA versus Venturers or Sea Scouts, because they are different levels of maturity and they can handle different levels of information. And we see this in the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics materials, where they have the principles for kids, which are worded one way, and then they have the standard principles that we use with adults and older youth. And so just like the center has that in the outdoor ethics world, Scouts has that as well in how we design programs. And those standards are found in the 100 series. And you'll find that sections 102, 3, and 4 are for Cub Scouts, Scouts BSA, and older Scouts or senior Scouts. And then the other sets of standards here that may affect you are PD 111 and 112. PD 112 is the major one, and that says that all councils should have a health and safety review process. And so your short-term camp administrator and staff advisor will help you understand what your council's process is. Sometimes you just interface with staff. Sometimes you may actually send some materials to the council's enterprise risk management committee to look at and get approved for your course. 111 only applies if we're going to do something that we haven't really done before in scouting. And then there's a little bit more involved process for it. And that's what the 111 standard is for. Next is the PS, or program specific 200 series standards. This is the bulk of the standards manual, and it covers all the great things that we do in scouting, from aquatics through shooting sports and cope and climbing and all-terrain vehicles and all that type of stuff. How much of this is going to be applicable to you? And the answer is, if you're just doing a basic training course, probably almost none of it. But if you're going to go out and you're going to have a shooting component to your outdoor ethics course, then you would be subject to the shooting sports standard. Similarly, if you have an aquatics element, like you're going to go kayaking as part of the course, then you would have to meet the aquatic standards. And so the PS standards apply if you're doing the activity that meets the definition of the standard. And they almost all start with, if offered, the camp does such and such. So if you're not offering that function or feature, that standard is not going to apply to you. Now, there is one here that I really want to call out to everybody's attention, and it's the fourth bullet point. And it says most Leave No Trace courses should trigger few of the PS standards unless it's a specialty course like an aquatics course. But in red, if you have 2 or more consecutive nights on the trail, then the Trek program requirements will apply. And that's standards PS 218 through 221. And they set forth a number of additional requirements that we have in place for programs where you're trekking from one place to another place and never staying in the same base camp, because there's a little bit more risk involved in that. And there's some more logistics that has to go into the health and safety planning for that. So if you don't want to do that Trek program and you're a Leave No Trace trainer's course, just have a single night, or stay your first night at the base camp and then go to your outpost camp on the second night. And we'll talk more about how to do that within the confines of the existing standards when we get to the scenarios a little bit later. The next set of standards is the 400 series. You'll note that we skipped the 300. There used to be Trek standards in 300. We moved them to 200. These standards are not going to affect Leave No Trace Master Educator or Trainer courses except for a couple. One is the Camp Health Officer, SQ 405, and that requires the basic requirements for what level of first aid certification do you need to have in order to offer a trainer course or a master educator course. For a trainer course, this may be a little bit more than we're used to having. We're going to have at least a person with first aid. If we're within 10 minutes of emergency medical services, we may need to have a slightly higher classification of a person if we're more than an hour from first aid or emergency medical services. So you'll want to look at SQ 405, talk to your short-term camp administrator and your staff advisor to understand how your council handles that. For a trek leader, if you have 2 or more consecutive nights on a trail, there's an NCS or National Camping School qualification called trek leader for leading those longer treks. We're going to talk about what you can do if you don't have a trek leader, because there aren't that many of them in the Boy Scouts or the BSA at the present moment, about what your options are. And the third thing is if you're offering a specialty camp, shooting sports, horses, aquatics, then you may need to have a specialty leader in that specialty field to assist you with your program. What you don't need to have is a camp director, program director, all the normal paraphernalia that we look at for running a summer camp. So here you can see my discussion about what do we do if we trigger the trek standards. Your first choice for front country courses is to avoid 2 consecutive nights on the trail and use the outpost alternative found in standard PS 217. The outpost standard says you can basically continue to operate sort of like a short-term camp and meet our normal standards and guidelines if you only go out for 1 night at a time and then return to the base camp each time, so that you never have 2 consecutive nights out. So for most trainer courses, the simple thing is to stay in base for the first night. And then if you're going to do some trekking, to do that for the second night. That avoids the trek standard and meets the outpost standards, and you don't require a trek leader for that. Of course, if you have a trek leader, we're all in favor of you using that trek leader, build them into your course, and really make it a special experience for everybody who's participating. The third choice, if you don't have the choice of avoiding 2 consecutive nights and you don't have a trek leader, is to exercise what's called a waiver. Now, the National Camp Accreditation Program has in the standards a provision where you can seek a waiver by demonstrating that a person has equivalent skills to what a trek leader would have. And we, meaning me, because they all come to me to a process, and your local council will sit down and we'll look at who you're proposing as the trek leader. We'll look at their experience, their prior training, what the council has, and who the other course participants are, and we'll determine whether we could issue a waiver that would allow you to conduct a trek format course without necessarily having to have a trek leader. But the bottom line is you have to demonstrate substantial equivalence to those standards in the PS 218 to 221 area. So you want to be sure you're familiar with that if you want to look at doing a program that will be trekking from one place to another place to another place after that. I see some little orange going on in the chat box, so I'm sure there will be some great questions about that, but we can spend some time on that in the Q&A session towards the end. The next big set of standards are important. These are the health and safety or HS standards, and there's some differences between short-term camps and what you're used to seeing at a long-term camp. The biggest one, honestly, is that if people generally leave their medical forms with their unit leader. Now, one of the challenges we have in Leave No Trace courses or outdoor ethics courses is that we don't have units coming. We typically have individuals. So in that case, you'll still need to have somebody serving as your course health officer. They'll collect those health forms and scan them to see if there's any issues that everybody needs to be aware of. And then you'll work with your short-term camp administrator to understand your council's policies for that type of event. Then we have facility standards. These apply if you're on a BSA property, may not apply if you're not on a BSA property. If you're not on a BSA property, then it's important that you and the short-term camp administrator or another designee from the council go and conduct that NCAP site appraisal so that we know the property is appropriate before we launch out onto it. The last set of standards is the dead hand of administration and operation. So this is, it says paperwork requirements. I guess I probably wouldn't have said that, but this is really what I would call are your planning requirements. The plans that you need to have in place, the things that Paula talked about, emergency action plans, a communication plan. What are you going, how are you going to be contacting people if you need to have EMS come in? What's your trek itinerary going to be if that's it? Where are you getting water? How are you disposing of stuff? Are you using bear bags or bear canisters? All those questions would be part of the plans that are covered by the A and O standards, administration and operation for that. Once again, the big thing here is don't reinvent the wheel. If your council's already done that for a different camp, talk to your staff advisor, the short-term camp administrator, see if you already have a number of those resources that are available to you, and then just adapt them for your use. There's no reason to make this a lot more complex than it needs to be. There are other things in the National Camp Standards Manual. If you've gone and looked at it, you'll see there's a number of recommended practices. These generally do not apply to short-term camps, which is what we're going to be doing in the outdoor ethics area. And so you can safely ignore those, but you can also look at them and say, gee, are any of these a good idea or a neat program thing that we could add to what we're doing? But they're in the nature of things that are good to do, but not required to do. There's always information that you can look for on the National Outdoor Programs website. You can see the URL there at the bottom of this page. There's information for that. There's also information on the NCAP page, which is a little bit easier to get to. It's www.scouting.org/NCAP, NCAP. And that takes you straight to all the information about the National Camp Accreditation Program. With that, what I'm going to do is sort of stop for a moment and see if there are questions, and also see if Paula has any scenarios that we might face in the Leave No Trace or outdoor ethics course training environment that would be common that we would want to talk about. And of course, the two big ones that we offer are the trainer course and the master educator course, which are different in length. And for the trainer course, we typically do that in one of two ways. One is we do a front country trainer course where we basically come to a car camping environment. And from that, we then go through the course material. We may move around to different campsites to study the impacts of different effects and different impact levels for that. Those are relatively simple. If you're going to set up your tent once and not move, it's pretty clearly a short-term camp. It's not going to be a trek program, and so you don't need to worry about the applicability of the trek standards. It's pretty easy. You just need to find that short-term camp administrator and work with them to get the program approved. And it's the council's responsibility to find that short-term camp administrator to work with you. Most councils, though, would be happy to have you sign up to become one as well. If you're going to do the trekking environment, say that you want to hike from point A to point B and not stay in the same camp, or that you want to hike through a canyon or something like that, so that it's more of a outdoor or wilderness experience than a front country experience. In that case, you'll need to see if you meet the criteria for a trek camp. If so, then you'll need to meet those additional standards. You would need to find, in addition to the short-term camp administrator, potentially somebody to serve as your trek leader, preferably somebody with an existing National Camp School credential. If you don't have that, then somebody with substantial experience that would have the equivalent of the National Camp School credential, and then apply for a waiver. Waivers do take some time, although many of you believe that all I do is work in scouting 24/7. In fact, I have a day job as well. And so you need to plan about a month to run everything through the waiver process. And so make sure you think about that additional time if you're going to need a waiver because you want to do some sort of trek program. Just as some of the consequences of having to run stuff from the local council up to the national council. It has to be reviewed not only by me, but by staff and by the volunteer committee that's responsible for the National Camp Accreditation Committee, and then it has to be written and then sent to the local council. So there's a number of steps that those types of requests have to go through. That's to make sure that we're doing everything in a safe and responsible way. On the Master Educator course, many of you probably have not had the privilege of being a leader for that. There's a very good guide that the National Outdoor Ethics Task Force, now the subcommittee, has put together that walks through almost all of the information that is in the syllabus. And I know that there's some discussions about how we're going to handle that going forward. But for now, you may be looking at the waiver situation or finding somebody with a trek leader to accompany the course and provide the coverage if you're going to be doing that trekking period. Otherwise, I think the best alternative, if you don't have a trek leader available or a person with equivalent skills, would be to plan to do a front country course and make a series of these visits to a different site for one night at a time, where you do that. If you're in a Monday through Friday, Tuesday and Thursday would be your outpost camps. That would be fully consistent with the national camp standards, without the necessity of having the person with the trek leader certification. So with that, Paula, let's throw the doors open to questions that you may have seen in the chat, which I'll try to respond to, or if there's anything that you would like to add, or Andrea as well, if you'd like to add anything. And then if we have a little bit more time after that, we may be able to take some questions live.
I do have just a few things that I would like to say.
Go ahead.
Because this is about safety, the National NCAP and all of the folks that worked very hard to put this together, it's not about finding a loophole. It's about doing the best for our scouts. So we need to find the ways to make this happen and make it happen well, because as people in outdoor ethics, we love the environment and we want to do it right. So instead of finding the loopholes, find the best way to make it happen. And the best way to make it happen is encourage the people in your councils to go and get the training. Several people have gone ahead early to get the training, and it's well worth the time and effort to become a short-term camp administrator. So Eric, there has been several questions and Andrea answered some of them, but the one that's recurring is about district events and troops getting together for events. Not everybody, I think, is reading in the chat, so we are going to save the chat if at all possible.
Yeah, and I don't know that I can see the chat right now because I'm presenting. But so the question about districts. So the district, when it has a camporee or it has an activity day or a day camp type activity, that's clearly a council activity and it's going to be subject to the NCAP standards. In general, if you have a multi-unit event, that's more likely than not going to be a council event. And I can answer the question definitively for Leave No Trace trainer courses. Those require council approval to be done. And that requirement of council approval under the syllabus makes them a district or council event subject to the standards. If two troops get together and decide that they're going to camp in the local wilderness area or whatever, that's a unit program activity that would be subject to the Guide to Safe Scouting.
And when in doubt, ask your council for guidance.
Absolutely. There will be a person, either a director of camping or a director of support services in the larger or medium-sized councils that's there to answer those types of questions. In the small councils, the scout executive can answer those.
Eric, can I correct you? If two different units go, it's a short-term camp. If they're not sponsored by the same group.
Eric, I can address that. This comes up quite a bit.
Thank you, Andrea.
No problem. And I wasn't doing a very good job lurking. Sorry, I was answering questions for you.
She was very nicely answering questions, Eric, so you don't have a whole lot of them. Andrea was a rock star.
I was lurking in the
Thank you,
background.
Andrea.
No problem. I was just gonna, this is a great question. I'm so glad it came up because it comes up all the time. And so I did post the frequently asked questions link in the chat window, and I'll post it again here in a second because we addressed this particular question in the question that talks about troops hosting a camporee. And basically, in order for units that do not share the same charter partner to co-host an event or to get together and do something. So an example I had in the chat was like two venturing crews want to go and do an overnight activity or something together. That needs to be approved by the council. And you can find that policy reference in the Activities and Civic Service Guide, which is referenced in the FAQ. So now your council could have a policy that's not allowed, right? And so that could likely be different council by council, and they may have their own process for how they approve those. But count two units getting together to do unit program with approval from the council is not a district or council event. So then sometimes, Eric, people will say, well, what makes it a council or district event? Well, one, who's collecting the money, who's coordinating the staffing and the activities, right? And so I think what we don't want to have done, which I appreciate, Paula, your comment, is people to use multi-unit activities as a loophole to avoid potentially meeting the standards, which would lead to greater safety and quality. So just that's just something to be sensitive to. And again, council should be assisting with that, since they need to approve any units getting together that don't share the same charter partner. So I hope that helps.
Thanks, Andrea. That's actually the most succinct discussion of that issue I've ever heard.
Good.
Other questions? Are people familiar with what the national camp standards look like? There is see if I can get mine up.
Just a sec. Let me just, Bob, does this answer did Andrea answer your question about what happens if one troop opens an activity to scouts from other units? Because she was talking about multi-unit events as well.
Yes and no. I think some people also mentioned in there, they'll have a Boy Scout troop that'll have Webelos come. They'll have the Scouts BSA unit that'll have some of the Cub Scouts come join them. At that point, does that need to have council exec approval?
Are those Webelos coming to a troop to visit as part of their Aero Light, or other, visiting a troop to see if they like the unit, et cetera? Like I'm a Webelos den or an Aero Light den, and I'm going to visit a troop because that's part of their curriculum, part of their advancement requirements. Is that why they're going?
Typically, yes.
I'll assume that's typically 90% of the reason. Then that example, no, except for obviously, ideally, units are hopefully recruiting kids out of their own Cub Scout feeder packs, but I know we all know that's not always the case. So to be sensitive to that.
Right, and not all units are out of the same charter. So our feeder unit does not have the same charter as we do.
That is not uncommon.
I don't even have feeder units.
That's
Yeah, I wish I had one when I was a Scoutmaster.
Whole different presentation, but I agree.
What the major thing is that's trying to be avoided here is the situation where we're avoiding the BSA Health and Safety Standards by trying to make a workaround, or where you have what we're trying to avoid is a unit basically running a competing scout camp to the local council because of the franchise arrangements between the national council and the local councils. And there's no real assurance of safety in that situation for the participants in that non-controlled event. And there's certainly no insurance coverage or other stuff that, should there be an injury or accident, that would necessarily allow that youth to be fully protected. So that's the genesis of the concern and why you see that policy, if you wonder about where it's coming from.
Andrea, a quick question. Where can we find the TREC guidelines or the TREC outline for that course? Because I'm curious what you guys teach in a week course.
The content from the TREC leader. If you go to that webpage that I posted on National Camping School, it'll give you a very generic in the brochure, which I can also post here.
Yeah, I saw that. I was just curious what the guys do for. I'll talk to you later. This is off this subject for this class.
And I can give you more context on that.
Actually, there's a lot of questions about that in the chat about the TREC leader training.
So the basics of TREC leader training, and I used to teach it, so I'll give a sort of a synopsis of the version that I did. It is talks about things like preconditioning. It talks about the requirements for local landowner approval, land management approval. How do you get those? How do you deal with it? A lot of it is about menu planning, trip planning, having the itinerary for it, things to look for safety and water and other conditions, site safety, proper location of campsites, the buddy system, how that applies in a TREC environment, divvying up weight, dealing with crew dysfunction issues as they arise during a TREC, planning mountaintop and teachable moments so that you build excitement as the trek progresses. And then there's techniques that, depending on where the course is, it may touch on things like Adirondack issues. If you're in the desert like I am, we often deal with more things like heat stress, how to find water where there isn't much of it. So some of it's going to vary depending on the climate and the milieu in which you are. But the basics are the health and safety and planning aspects about how to plan and operate a trek safely from the planning stage through the final delivery of the kids back to their parents, or of your participants back to their spouses.
Are we talking about L&T number 1?
It is like plan ahead and prepare, but it is unlike what we teach in the Master Educator course. It's about the mechanics of planning the activities. How much food do you need to have, calorie levels, things of that level, not so much the learning environment that you're going to be using.
In some cases, and I think Nick mentioned the Massaweppi course, in some cases, like in the state of New York, we have to follow some additional guidelines per state requirements for those council camps to run trek programs. And so in some cases, we add additional content to meet state regulations as well.
That's, yes, very true for the Voyager programs up in that area. But that gives you sort of a general sense of what's generally in the course. There's map and compass, that type of stuff.
Okay, I guess I can see how you can get a week worth of stuff out of that now. Andrew, back to the original question, and I'm sorry I'm re-asking this again. It's pretty common in my council that we got small crews, 3 or 4 crews will get together and do an activity. I've got one going on here in a couple of weeks. Basically, they're going to do a big hike together over a couple-day hike. I guess by definition, that's a trek and that's a district event.
So the way you described that, without knowing more of the event itself, you just said was a couple of units getting together to go and do a hike, potentially overnight. Is that what you said?
Yeah, that's pretty well. They're going to try to do a 2 or 3 day overnight trip. Yeah.
If that event for those 2 units working together is approved by the council as a unit activity, then it would not qualify as a trek program. If, however, it's designated as a council organized, sponsored district coordinated event, then yes, it would be considered a trek, a short-term camp trek.
I guess I'm still confused on that answer. I'm sorry.
John, give me a call.
Yeah, I'll give you a call. Yeah,
and we can walk through, because I think Eric will appreciate. There's definitely nope. You're not wasting time. Not wasting our time, but there's just so much nuance in everybody's situations. No problem.
Any other questions? We have a couple minutes before the hour runs. Gee, Andrea, you must have done a really good job answering the questions in the chat.
Yeah, I'm very confused about this 2 unit thing. I just heard if the 2 units are doing something and it's not council approved, but you're telling me that for 2 units to do something together, it has to be council approved. So clarify, please.
Sure. And so just for clarity, and apologies if I confuse the issue, but if 2 units or more who do not share the same charter partner, so if you have a troop and a crew, for example, or same charter partner might have a Scouts BSA girl unit and a Scouts BSA boy unit, right? Those are the same charter partner. Pre-approval is not required. But if they share different charter partners, then the council has to approve those units working together to do an activity or an overnight or whatever that is. That council approval is required. Interestingly, that is actually not a new policy in the Boy Scouts. It's just not a very well-known one. It's definitely come more to light, Eric, in the last few months as we've rolled out short-term camp. So FYI. So Bob, in your example, if one troop opens the activity to other units, that has got to be approved by the council. Now, open the activity is a little bit of a vague statement, so I don't want to just say 100% that would not be a short-term camp without knowing more. But based on what you told me, that likely could be a unit level activity with more than 1 unit that's approved to meet together. Sorry if that's not clear. And feel free to call me too, Bob, and I'd be happy to chat with you more. Or call
let me run a happen this year activity. We had a hike planned in the Rocky Mountain National Park, and due to some COVID problems, we lost half our crew, and we said, well, anybody else want to come with us? And we quickly got 6 more people that wanted to come. In order to do what you're telling me is, in order to do that, I had to get council approval. Yes or no?
That is correct. The way you've described that, correct.
Okay.
And I can give you just a really quick the why, because I think why is really important. So remember that, and part of this might also include your charter partner might also want to approve your unit working with another charter partner, because if you have adults coming from multiple charter partners, that other charter partner hasn't approved this charter partner's adults, right? And so the council just wants to make sure that we don't circumvent the charter partner's opportunity to select and approve the volunteers working with their youth. So that might be way too in the weeds, but I just wanted to give you a little context as to why that guideline exists.
Talk about a bunch of mixed liability there. Wow.
Yeah.
Also,
yeah.
Also, if you check page 20 in the BSA Activities and Civic Service Guide, that is always that has been in there for quite some time, this conversation. And so you'll get more guidance in that as well as from Andrea.
But councils have known about this for a year. They don't enforce it. So
we used to have an action plan, not an action plan, but a tour plan. And that was their guidance. They signed it or they didn't.
Paula,
yes.
And this might be either you or Andrea. So page 20 of the Activities and Civic Services is where it mentions this business of if your 2 units do not share the same chartered partner.
Right, and it gives you guidance on the paperwork and the information that you have to pull together and get approval from ahead of time. As Andrea said, the other charter partners haven't approved the other leaders, so that sort of thing can be done ahead of time with council help and approval. Is that correct, Andrea?
Sorry, I was answering a question in the chat. What was the question? Sorry.
No, I'm just saying that the council will help them with the paperwork, the page 20 paperwork.
Yeah.
Yep. And to your point, I think that was Andrew talking. Maybe?
Yes, it was. Yeah. It was
Andrew, that can it very much differs from council to council. It could be super dramatic process in your council, all the way to some type of email or some kind of your council has its own way of doing it. There's no set way to do that, except for they have to have one.
Yeah, I just wanted to seek clarification of the source of that, because if I mention it to some adults in our council, they're likely to say, well, okay, you've said this, but where is the source document of this? So it's just going back to actually finding the requirements stated so I can show it to people if necessary. Thank you.
No problem.
To answer the question, can the course organizer lead also be the short-term camp administrator? Absolutely, yes, as long as they meet the requirements for that.
Hey, Paula and Eric, there's been a couple questions in your chat here about access to some of the links that were provided and the PowerPoint deck. I don't know, Paula, how you traditionally do that. If you'd like, I can email a couple of those links to you directly, and you could share it with those who are maybe participating by phone and couldn't see some of the material that was being provided.
Okay,
yeah,
that would be
Paula,
great.
do you want to talk about how we archive and make information available?
Yeah, some of this will be sent to you. The links and things. This PowerPoint is a little bit different than the implementing one. So Eric, are you going to let us use your PowerPoint? Yeah. Okay, so Eric,
Andrea is good with it, yes.
Yep, no problem.
And we can also send the link to the short-term camp administrator site, can we, Andrea?
Oh yes, please do. I think they'll find a lot of great information to help them as they navigate these new waters.
Yeah, because the short-term camp administration also has short-term camp has several not requirements, but standards that you can look at, so you'll see where it's flowing from and how the ones that we need to use for our outdoor ethics training or overnight trainings, how they all work together. And Eric also said something about the standards that were, you know, you don't have to follow, but are good ones to follow. I think
Recommended practices.
right, those. Thank you, Eric. I think those are good ones to look at because someday they may be in that stack of standards. And also always striving to be a little bit better. That's all we do. Okay, so that's, we have everybody's email and things, and we have planned to send a survey, possibly as soon as tomorrow. And some of these links will be in that email. Were there more questions? Did I miss some?
There's one, Paula, here I'm just going to answer real quick that's asking, and Eric, I think you addressed this a little bit in your presentation, so it's good to reinforce it, that can your council grant short-term camp accreditation approval? And the answer to that is yes, through the short-term camp administrator. That's their role. One of their jobs is to do that. Correct, Eric? Did I get that right for you?
Yeah, it's a little bit ambiguous whether they're talking about the camp authorization or the short-term camp administrator NCS accreditation. So the NCS, the short-term camp administrator accreditation comes through National Camping School. There's a series of online and also local council courses that are done, but it has to be earned through one of those NCS venues.
Yes, I think we've got, I think we've got about 100 councils currently approved to offer the short-term camp administrator training.
Yeah.
And I think we're at about 700 short-term camp administrators trained so far, which is awesome. And then in addition to the local council courses being offered, we are offering some nationally, especially to support councils who may not want to host one in their council. So, and that's on that same short-term camp website that Paula indicated, and I believe she'll be putting in the outdoor ethics materials.
That is correct.
Well, seeing no more questions, I really appreciate so many people turning up to learn about short-term camp administration and the short-term camp standards and how they're going to be interfacing with our Leave No Trace trainer and Leave No Trace Master Educator courses. If you do have any questions in the slides, I believe there was my email address. I'll also put it in the, here as we go before I can get back to the everybody message. And there a way to, maybe Paula can put it up. I'm not being able to get into the chat. Where that, so there we go. So anybody that wants to can certainly reach me as well if you have questions that come up about how the standards apply to this activity. It's the eheiser.bsa@gmail.com now shows up in the chat. With that, Paula, I'll turn it back over to you for any closing remarks you want to make on behalf of the National Outdoor Ethics Subcommittee.
Well, we are very pleased to see so many come out tonight and get some information. The parts about the Master Educator courses will be done more completely with those that are leading those courses. And so they will have all the standards that apply for that. So you won't have to worry about those unless you're doing a Master Educator course in your council. The trainer courses, your councils have the final words on most of the things that we talked about tonight, but they're going to follow the standards and the short-term camp administrator. Some of those that you have not heard about this before, it started on the 1st of January. That's why I thought it was very important for us to be able to know some of the things that we need to be putting into place as trainers that are master educators that are doing trainer courses. So we know what, when this gentleman or lady comes and says, hey, you got to have one of these and you need to do this and where's this? So your heads up and you will get all kinds of paperwork to help you out. I do recommend that you get yourself a set of standards. It's much easier to have them all all in a book instead of piecemealing and have 5 here and 5 there. It doesn't work as well. I tried that. So if there aren't any more questions, we have the gurus here. You have Eric Heiser and Andrea Watson, who are gurus in this field. So
Paula, I'm going to put a link in your window here of the link to, if you want to purchase your own personal copy of the NCAP standards. Nothing makes a better Valentine's Day gift, by the way, than a copy of the NCAP standards. I'll put the link here, so if you like, you can purchase those.
it's okay. Somebody sent them to me for Christmas. I was jazzed.
That's what I'm saying. It's a great gift. Everyone wins.
There used to
Eric,
be
are
a
you a
down,
divorce attorney then?
there used to be a downloadable PDF with them.
Oh,
I'm
it's
not
also
sure.
available for free on the internet. You're totally right. You don't have to have a print copy, but if you want a print copy, you can purchase one. No problem.
Yeah, if you go to the www.ncap link, which I'll put up for that, everybody, you can get the free one.
I personally, Eric, like the digital one because I can search by a word, right? So if I go into the digital version and just Control F, I can look for the word trek, and every single reference with the word trek comes up. So that is a very easy way to find answers to questions you might have on the standards. But
Yeah.
if you like paper things, you can always buy a $10 copy of the standard.
And the table of contents is helpful at the front as well, where it lists each standard and what it does.
So I want to say hello to my new friends, and I want to say hello to my old friends that I see a lot of names on here that I recognize. So with that said, Matt, do you have anything else?
Nope, I don't have anything else.
Matt's been our moderator tonight. He's been running the link, and Chandra Clark was our registration person, and she's been an excellent promoter as well. All of those nice notices that you got were from her. She put those in there so you would get warnings of when to remind you that things were happening. So thank you very much for coming. In February, we actually have the person who is doing that. I saw her face on here not too long ago. Karen, would you
I'm
like to
here.
tell everybody a little bit about your course that you're going to do in
We are
February?
doing, absolutely. We're going to do one called It's Not Just for Girls, Doing Outdoors What We Do Indoors. And basically it covers how to do in the outdoors what you do in the indoors. You get up in the morning, you pick your clothes. Why do you want to pick the clothes you pick when you go out into the world to go camping and hiking and trekking? Why do you choose all sorts of things? For girls, how to pee in the outdoors. For every one of us, how to poop in the outdoors. Get into the science behind it all, and people understand it a whole lot better. So we're going to give you a quick primer. It's normally a multi-hour presentation. We're going to chop it down to 1 hour, so it's going to be very brief. So come on back, come listen, come learn, come teach me new things.
Okay. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Chandra and Matt and Andrea. I am so happy you dropped by.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks, everybody.
Is this going to be a monthly meeting at the same time, second Tuesday, or is this just, one-time deal?
No, we have done how to do a virtual training, outdoor ethics training event. Mark Hammer, who's on here tonight, did a really nice presentation of the website and how the links and tools that are on it. That was last month. And this month was this presentation. And we're hoping to have one from the center in March and maybe some marketing stuff in April or May. So we're ongoing. We're going to try to do one a month, focusing on outdoor ethics type things that would be of value for us to know. And if you have any ideas of things that you would like, put it in your survey, because one of the questions that we're asking, do you have an idea of something that you would like to see presented? And we will find somebody who can do that. Well, let's be relevant. Let's not get crazy here.
Paula, is it always going to be on the second Tuesday?
Matt, is it? Did your day change? Can we go back to Wednesday?
We can do either of those now. So
okay.
I think more information about that is pending. Just partly my fault. I'm between jobs and I started a new job and my schedule's been put into upheaval. So, but it will be either we'll have a consistent date out soon for what day it is and time when we'll do it regularly.
Yeah, we're trying to make the consistent date, but every now and then either the presenter can't make it on that, can't make it, or the guy who runs the show can't make it. Okay, that was a good question, Dave. Okay, everybody. See you next time. Oh. Why did my light not there? Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone. Thanks so much, Paula and everybody. It's a great program.
Thank you
so much.